And from what I was telling them about what I knew at that time is only a fraction of what they were really doing that came out with all the documents. There was far more stuff they were doing than I had any inkling that they were doing.
Lying to the public, deceiving, false advertising to kids.
More doctors smoke Camel.
In the 1950s, you couldn't look at a movie or a TV show without seeing Philip Morris or R.J. Reynolds, and you couldn't find an actor or actress who wasn't having a cigarette in their hand. Desi Arnaz and Lucy Ball, I Love Lucy show, was completely sponsored by Philip Morris.
Test of hundreds of people who smoked only Camels for 30 days, noted throat specialists making weekly examinations reported not one single case of throat irritation due to smoking Camels.
So when I was 12 or so, Fred Flintstone's cartoon was on TV, and it was sponsored by Winston. And Fred and Barney sing the Winston song, Winston's taste good like a cigarette should.
The Flintstones has been brought to you by Winston, America's best-selling, best-tasting filter cigarette. Winston tastes good like a cigarette should.
And so January 1971, all TV ads were banned. And then they shifted all their money over to print media, to magazines and stuff, and newspapers. They put it into racing and sports, and baseball scoreboards then said Marlboro.
The big pushback then was, smoking is sexy, it's slim, it pushes women further, you've come a long way, baby, that kind of stuff. And the tobacco industry knew that they had to go after women back in the 70s and 80s because women were actually smoking much less than they are now. Back then, women's tennis couldn't find a sponsor. Nobody wanted to sponsor women's tennis. So who sponsored them? The Philip Morris Tobacco Company.
Snuff and dipping tobacco was almost gone. It was almost dead. Some little old ladies used snuff, but that was about it. But then when United States Tobacco came out with Skoal and then Copenhagen, and the advertisers of Skoal, they used Earl Campbell and Charlie Waters and Charlie Daniels to teach kids how to use Skoal. There were ads to teach you how to put a pinch between your cheek. And then once they got addicted to Skoal, then you could move up to Copenhagen, which was a higher nicotine content. And there's actually documents that say that from US Tobacco that the salesmen are not allowed to hand out freebies at Copenhagen because Copenhagen is much too high a nicotine content and would just kind of blow out their heads and just make them sick and vomit. And so they were never allowed to do that. You could only hand out Skoal to kids.
Back in the 1970s, there's documents from the tobacco industry. They would actually pay realtors to have tobacco products in the back of the store at eye height for 12-year-old kids. And they would say, the kids are going to steal those products, don't bust them. We will replace the product, free. Because the tobacco industry estimated that if a kid stole anywhere between 5 and 10 packs of cigarettes, they had a smoker for 50 years. They knew they were selling an addictive product. They knew that the young people's brains get addicted more quickly. So they would actually pay the realtor to let kids become addicted. They strategically marketed to young people. If you look at the history of tobacco sales, you go from 1960, when the average sale was about 20 to 21 years old, to today, which is 12. That's amazing. So they strategically kept lowering the bar on who they were going to target, knowing that older people, 18 to 21, are more likely to not make a wrong decision. So they targeted young people.
The Marlboro at that time, Philip Morris had Marlboro vans going around all the cities in Texas. They would give out freebies of all sorts. You could get shirts and hats and belt buckles. They had where you got so many points for each pack of cigarettes or each cart. When you collected up your points, then you could buy stuff out of the Marlboro catalog. We decided we would get our own van And so we bought a VW van and we painted it with the Marlboro colors, except it said Barfboro. They had I believe it was a dirt bike racing event across the West as one of their promotions. And they were nice enough to give us the list of places they were going to be. And so the Barfboro van followed the Marlboro folks all along their trip. And then in 1991, I believe it was, Philip Morris rented the Virginia copy of the Bill of Rights. So they put it in a big armored truck and had this entourage, and they went from city to city to city showing off the Bill of Rights. And so at each city, they would have kids from the schools come in and see all the Philip Morris advertising stuff as they went in. They knew it was sponsored by Philip Morris, but to see the Bill of Rights. And so the Dock chapter in Seattle made a statue of Nicotina, which looked like the Statue of Liberty, except she was holding a cigarette in one hand and a pack of cigarettes in the other hand. At the bottom, we also had a digital counter, and it counted off the number of people who had died of tobacco since the start of the tour. Philip Morris was also nice enough to give us itinerary, all the cities they were going to be at. So different groups around the country drove the statue, which we could break down into 3 parts, followed them around. So everywhere they set up their exhibit, we set up the Statue of Nicotina and got great press all over the place.
The contract shows that Juul paid the Richmond PAL $89,000. In exchange for that payment, Juul got to provide its curriculum controlling the information presented to a group of potential customers, preteens and teens already using e-cigarettes. That's another page out of Big Tobacco's playbook.
They said they didn't do experiments with kids because that's not, you can't do that. But they did do focus groups. And they also put together an educational package on Juul that they wanted to bring into schools. That wasn't to educate kids about Juul, it was to educate kids about how Juul works. And so you give a kid information about how you use the product, and guess what? They're going to try to use the product. I think it's particularly disturbing that they've argued that there's a health benefit. There's absolutely no data to support that at all. There's just no data to support that. They're telling you something that doesn't exist.
Did the presenter ever mention his connection to Juul, and were your teachers in the room when he spoke?
He did mention his connection to Juul, and my teachers were not in the room when he spoke.
Did the presenter ever say that Juul was safe?
Yes.
Did the presenter call Juul, quote unquote, totally safe more than once?
Yes.
The tobacco industry has morphed into now let's sell our addictive product in a different way. Let's make it technical for kids. We're going to make it look appealing for kids. We're going to have it different colors and flavors. Same thing that they did with tobacco and a cigarette in a tobacco package, but now it's more appealing for the young person who's technology savvy. I go to schools all over the country, and when elementary principals come up to me and show me a box with 10 or 12 or 15 electronic cigarettes in it and say, I've confiscated this from kids all the way down to 3rd and 4th grade. I mean, what is that? I mean, wouldn't any sane person say, okay, wait a minute, let's back the horse up, let's stop production, let's look into this? And that's not going to happen because the tobacco industry now owns 35% of Juul. They probably own 35% of Congress.